I go for gold like I'm getting a gun from James Bond. First shot, I'ma kill it, never remain calm. Clever with the lyrics, but fire dragon.
So my guest today is Greg Koukl, and Greg is the president, founder of Stand to Reason. You can find a lot out about Stand to Reason if you check out their website, str.org. They have a lot of articles, blogs, podcasts, apologetic training, everything you need to get started in apologetics. So go there if you're interested in that. He's also written a book that a lot of apologists use called Tactics. It's one of my favorite books, and it's really useful for those who are having difficult conversations and not sure how to have conversations with skeptics or unbelievers. And this is the 10-year anniversary of Tactics. So if you haven't read Tactics, now is definitely the time to jump on board, because Greg has written, or he has actually updated and expanded the first edition of Tactics, and now we have a larger edition. So Greg, how are you, man?
I'm still waking up. You're in Louisiana. I'm on the West Coast, and I got a slow start this morning. But I had my coffee, and usually I say before my first cup of coffee, I'm an atheist. So I'm just kind of right now I'm a Jehovah's Witness. I'm just working.
Yeah.
So by the way, even for people who have the first edition, and some of your listeners, viewers might have that. There's so much more material in the second edition that they are going to want to get the new one. Give the older one to some friend, or you, Christian, get the second, because there's 40% more material. In fact, I was comparing the spines here,
Wow.
This is the new one, this is the old one, and there's it's so hefty by comparison. So lots of good stuff in there, 6 new chapters. I've almost doubled the number of tactics that are available. So I think even those that were faithful readers of the first edition, I worked hard this last year to produce a second edition that has a lot more really, really good information in it.
Yes, it does. And I told you before the podcast that I just finished reading through the updated version. And
Uh-huh.
yeah, I mean, there's so much that's been added on. And so that's why I say if someone hasn't read this is the time to read it. If you've already read the first Tactics, you're missing out if you don't pick up the expanded, updated edition. So I would say check that out. For those who aren't familiar, and there may be some out there that aren't familiar with Tactics, first off, what are you doing? You got to read Tactics. But if you're not familiar with that, why don't you tell them a little bit about Tactics as a whole, what it's about, what your
Sure.
purpose in writing Tactics was?
Right. Great question. Over the years, and I've been doing this for almost 4 decades now, over the years, uh, there's been an explosion of really, really good apologetics information, conferences, books, podcasts, blogs. I mean, it's all over the place. Good information. The problem is there's a missing element, and the missing element is the bridge from the content to the conversation. How do you get all of that good information into play in a conversation? There's a missing bridge from the scholarship to the relationship kind of thing. And I think that's where a lot of people who know a few things struggle. They know the gospel. Okay, how do you get into a conversation? People ask me that a lot. I know these reasons why it's smart to believe in God. It's smart to believe in the Bible. It's smart to believe in Jesus or the whole Christian worldview. But how do you get into play, pardon me, in conversations that don't make you look weird, all right, and look more like diplomacy than D-Day, all right? And so this was the kind of driving principle behind Tactics. It isn't like I just sat down one day and thought, well, let me see if I can build a bridge here. What I realized over many, many years is that I had been developing things just in the course of engaging people. I've spoken on actually close to 85 college and university campuses. I've been in live talk radio for 30 years. And so it's hard to keep track of all this. And so in those engagements, I've learned ways to maneuver. I've learned mistakes not to make. I've learned different ways to be gentle. How does Jesus put it? Shoot as serpents, but gentle as doves. And so I began to quantify these things. And they're not all particularly profound. I mean, the idea of asking questions goes all the way back to Socrates, who was 400 years before Christ. Now, I try to update the concept a little bit and create a game plan that's easy to follow using a very particular series of questions. It's really only 3 steps. Makes it simple. It's easy to I throw the ball so people can catch it, basically. But what I've found in the process, Clark, is that as I've taught this material for over 20 years, long before the book came out, so I taught this material and refined it. The most common response that I get from people, especially who read the first book, and I'm just saying, this is what they tell me. They say, this book changed my life. And I hear that phrase over and over and over again. And the reason is, I think, because it accomplishes in general what I set out to do, to provide them a game plan for discussing their Christian convictions that is a very practical bridge from the content to the conversation. And I've been really thrilled to see the response so far. But I'm not surprised when they say that it changed their lives, because, I mean, this material changed my life and took me from being nervous and being feeling vulnerable, having to answer all the questions, to being safe, feeling secure, feeling relaxed, and not putting myself any more on the line than I needed to. This new edition of Tactics, I checked yesterday, I got 40 reviews so far. Every one of them is a 5-star review. So I'm a happy camper right now.
Yes, and if you're listening and you've enjoyed Tactics, go give him a review on Tactics, because I know that helps with getting it out there. And then, like I said, the new version is so useful, so effective. To add on, you pointed it out, and I think this is something people need to grasp. When you read Tactics, if you're a person who, like myself, I don't enjoy confrontation. I'm not one
Yeah,
of those who wants to have an argument, believe it or not, even though I study apologetics. I don't enjoy the heated conversations that we're probably going to have at Thanksgiving and Christmas time and all those
right,
things.
right,
I don't want to fight with people. But what I like about Tactics is it takes the pressure off of you. This isn't Tactics as in, hey, you're going to get these tactics and you're going to destroy people in debates, and
right,
you're going to, it's more of, here's how to defuse the conversation and
right,
really get to the heart of what someone believes that
right,
disagrees
right.
with you. And I like what you say about just putting a pebble in their shoe, just
Yeah,
give them a
that's it.
little something to think about.
Yeah, this is part, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's central to the whole tactical approach. This idea of putting a stone in their shoe or a pebble in their shoe. And it is foundational to a foundation in my view, that needs to be understood before the tactics can be most effective. And what I spend time now when I teach this, is I spend 10, 15 minutes trying to um, um, get people to think about evangelism in a different way. All right. I became a Christian during the Jesus movement 46 years ago, and then it was simple. You share the simple gospel, you answer some simple questions, and then you pray. Simple. Lots of people came to Christ. But of course, it's not that simple anymore. It's hard, because there's a lot of hostility in the culture, not just to the cross, which has always been the case. It's always been a stumbling block, but also to virtually everything that Christians hold to be true about reality.
Mm.
And so, whether it's the nature of truth, or whether it's the nature of being human, or the nature of gender, or the nature of sexuality, these are kind of the hot topics right now. And all the other classical things, the problem of evil, the resurrection, the authority of the Bible, and did Jesus really exist, all of that. Wow, that's a lot of opposition, okay? And so, just going in to try, if you have a technique that is geared on, well, let's just get to the simple gospel, and try to close the deal. Not only is that not going to be effective, because people need a lot more of what Francis Schaeffer used to call pre-evangelism, okay?
Mm.
But it's also going to force a lot of Christians to sit on the bench, because just like you, they don't like conflict. And I'm the same way. I don't like conflict either. If anybody gets mad, I'm going to lose, right? So why
Right.
should I? Why do we want to get in fights? So they sit on the bench because they don't know any other way. And what the tactics game plan does is provide a different way, a way to engage in a thoughtful manner, without drawing lines in the sand, without defending turf with the dukes up and all of that stuff. No. And I know people are thinking, how could you possibly do that? Well, the game plan allows you to do that, because you come into the shallow end of the pool, and the core of the game plan, as we'll get to, is asking certain kinds of questions to gather information and to initiate a friendly conversation. And in the process of doing that, we can even parry challenges and heated pushback by using questions. And so when I start my teaching, I make a promise to the listeners. And I make it in the beginning of the book, in the foreword. I think I say I'm promising you that I am going to give you a game plan that will allow you to converse with confidence in any situation, no matter how little you know or how knowledgeable or aggressive or even obnoxious the other person happens to be. Now, that's a tall order, but even if I'm just working for 45 minutes with an audience, when I'm done, they have the basic parts of the game plan. They don't have the whole book, obviously, but they have the basic pieces of the game plan that will allow them to get started and see how powerful this approach can be.
Right. I grew up in the church, and we were sort of taught coming up sometimes to be sort of like car salesmen. You hand somebody a invitation and you say, "Come to my church," and you try to close the deal. And you talk about this a lot. Like, we want to close the deal. We want to get people to the cross. And that wasn't really the approach that Jesus modeled. Believe
Right,
it or not, those listening may say, "Well, didn't Jesus go straight to the point?" I feel like Jesus actually put a lot more pebbles in shoes. I think he
right,
gave people things to think about. And David Geisler, we had him on the program. He talks about allowing the truth to surface for someone else. And I feel like that's what the pebble in the shoe does, is it puts them in a
right.
place where the truth begins to surface to them without you
Yeah,
having to tell. Because if we just tell someone the truth, it may not mean the same thing as if they see it for themselves. And so
sure.
putting the pebble in the shoe really helps to do that. And that's why I like,
Yeah,
that
yeah, I
analogy there.
agree. David does really good work. I think his book is it Conversational Apologetics? I can't remember, but it
Conversational evangelism is the book.
evangelism, right?
Yeah.
So there is a kinship between our books. In fact, we've done talks together on the stage because we there's a nice blend between what he's done and what I've done. But I think he's actually right. If we can position the circumstances where other people are, in a sense, convincing themselves because we're guiding the conversation in a particular way, it's going to be a lot more effective. And let me add one more thing to this predicate that I was laying there about how you view evangelism. I make the distinction between harvesting and gardening. Okay,
Mm,
and here's the important truism, and that is before there can be any harvest, there always has to be a season of gardening. Let me just say that again because it's so important. Before there can be any harvest, there always has to be a season of gardening. Gardening's critical. I mean, this is so commonsensible, but we don't think of it with regards to evangelism. And so, if our evangelism techniques are techniques that are principally harvesting oriented, and that's all the tracks and the four spiritual, all of these things that have value, not
mm,
putting it down, but these are all about harvesting. What if the harvest is not ready yet? Now you're trying to pluck fruit that's not ready. How do you garden? And here's something that I tell people now. Maybe you heard me when I talked about it with Frank Turek on his own program, because I've just now in the last 3 or 4 months been saying this, and it really shocks audiences. But I realize it's really effective to make my point. I tell audiences that I have not prayed with anyone to receive Christ in at least 30 years. What a loser! You know, that is so lame. But and the reason is because I realize that I am a gardener and not a harvester. You know, Jesus
mm,
said, John chapter 4, after the woman at the well conversation, he tells to the disciples, "You are about to reap where you did not sow." Okay? Some sow, some reap. Okay,
mm,
now notice he identifies one field, but he's identifying two seasons, sowing and reaping, gardening and harvesting, and two kinds of workers, gardeners and harvesters. Some people gardened. The disciples are now coming in. They're getting easy pickings. They're getting the low hanging fruit because somebody else did the heavy lifting, right?
mm,
Well, who is that? These are people that are placed in circumstances to do the gardening that is Jesus implies in that passage, and Paul does it in First Corinthians. I think he talks about some water, you know, and how does he put it? Some plant, some water. God causes the increase. So this,
mm,
all I'm encouraging people to do This is the most freeing aspect of this, Clark, is I'm not encouraging them to press for a decision. When I talk to somebody that in a conversation I hope will have spiritual impact, I never am thinking about leading them to Christ. I'm thinking about what you just mentioned, giving them something to think about, putting a pebble in their shoe. And if
Mm.
I can annoy them in a good way, kind of, then I've done my job, because all I am is a gardener. And if we get a lot of gardeners off the bench, when they realize, hey, I can do that, I can do that, they get
Yeah.
off the bench. We got more gardeners. Guess what? There's going to be more of a harvest for the ones God has gifted as harvesters.
Yeah, that's so good. And yeah, I think we have to master that gardening process. It's a little more tedious than people you think, but just
It's a
learning
hard work.
how to it's
The
the
hard work
work.
is
You're
hard.
tilling the
Yeah,
soil, and the harvest is the great part where you get to really benefit off of the work you've put in. And I heard you on Frank's podcast talk about I was a gardener, but then you have Jay Warner Wallace listening to Stand to Reason, and he's learning
yeah,
from your podcast as he's
yeah.
trying to make a decision on whether he wants to believe in this or not. He
Right,
wants to
right.
come to faith as a Christian, and now he's
Yeah,
one of the leading apologists out there. So
yeah,
that's the benefit of gardening is
yeah.
you're going to see a lot more. If you garden more, you'll see a bigger harvest.
So
You
what
know.
happened here is Jim was in my garden before he was a Christian, still an
Mm.
atheist, right?
Yeah.
There's other gardeners in his life, but I was one of them, all right?
Hmm.
And somebody came into my garden and picked my tomatoes.
Right.
Well, you know what? I don't care, because Jesus says in John 4, so that the one who reaps and the one who sows can rejoice
Mm.
together. We're all in the same team. Abdul Murray is somebody else that your listeners might know. He's
Mm.
he's a former Muslim, became a Christian, and now he's a senior vice president over Rabbi Zacharias International Ministries. Well, Abdul was in my garden too. He was
Right.
listening to the show while he was still a Muslim, you know. And so I mentioned this not to wave my own flag here. I
Mm.
mentioned this to make it clear to people the importance and the significance and the strategic role of the gardening portion. Somebody else can do the harvest. I'm fine with that. But I
Right.
can make these investments in the lives of these good people. And there's been many others who have told me the same thing, that I don't have to worry about the end game. I can worry about what I'm doing. And the tactics book gives the game plan that allows
Mm.
people to do the gardening effectively.
Mm. So let's talk about the new edition. So, you wrote Tactics. It was a success. So many apologists have used it. So why would you go back and add on and expand? And if it's
Yeah.
a good thing, if it's not broke, why fix it? So,
Sure. Well, there's
uh,
two reasons. Clark, that's a really good question. There's two reasons.
mm,
One of them is just literary in a certain sense. In the last 10 years since I wrote this, I've done a lot of writing. I have another book, The Story of Reality. You might be familiar with that. It's really been
mm,
received well and won some awards, whatever. And the point is working through my own craft and trying to get better at my own craft. I've improved my skills at writing. And so I was able to go back over the material that was already there in the first book and clean it up quite a bit, just make it
mm,
flow better. In fact, yesterday I did an interview like this, and the gal said, I felt like I was reading a whole new book, because
yeah.
the voice was so much easier to my ears, kind of thing. And I think that's characteristic of good writing: the voice, the euphony, the sound in our head as we're reading. So that's one part of it. But of course, that's not the main part, because if I just was trying to clean up the text a little bit, I wouldn't spend a better part of this year fixing it. In that time, I also learned two things. I learned better ways to explain the things that were in the first book and therefore expand on them. So in the first book, the gardening and harvesting concept is there like in one paragraph.
Mm,
Well, I've expanded that to like a page and a half now, because I realize it's so important, and I want people to get the concept as like I said, a foundation to the whole project of the tactical game plan. I've also learned new ways to maneuver. Okay. And so I have a whole chapter on a new tactic that actually is one I've been using for a long time, but I never put it in the book. And I call it Inside Out. And the point of that tactic is that there are certain things that God has built on the inside of every human being that's going to come out when in unguarded moments that bear
Mm.
testimony to the truthfulness of the Christian worldview. So we're just listening for that, and then we can have ways of taking advantage of it. In a certain sense, most non-believers believe what we already believe. All right,
Mm.
but they don't admit it when they're in a jousting match on spiritual things. But if you watch for unguarded moments that come out, and so I talk about the inside coming out. I have a whole chapter in there about what I call mini tactics. And these are
Mm.
small maneuvers, okay, that I explain in 3 or 4 paragraphs each. I think there's 5 or 6 of them. And for example, what a friend we have in Jesus. That's the name of a tactic. And the whole idea is get Jesus on your side whenever you can. Let him do the arguing for you because people respect Jesus even if they don't respect the individual Christian. So when I had my
Mm.
national debate on TV with Deepak Chopra, um, my strategy wasn't to pit Dr. Chopra against Greg Koukl because Deepak Chopra is the one of the few people in the world who is recognized by his first name. It's Deepak, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah. So okay, so I'm up against a brand that is very, very powerful. Instead, I decided to pit Dr. Chopra against Jesus.
Mm.
So Dr. Chopra says this, Jesus says this, who are you going to believe? Kind of that deal. And so it's to get myself a little bit out of the center of that. So there's that. There are more ways to apply that, but that's the general idea of that mini tactic. And there are, like I said, 4 or 5 more mini tactics that are very easy to employ. One's called sticks and stones. How do you deal with people who call you intolerant or um, uh, bigoted or racist or narrow-minded? These kinds of name calling that substitutes for good thinking and good engagement. You know, people just stop you in the tracks by calling you a name, and that's not going to
Mm.
get you anywhere. And so there's a way of helping them see the mistake that they've made, hopefully getting back onto the topic.
Right.
So that's all part of the new book.
Right, and that's good because there's so much more to like that you expanded on. One thing that was such a big part of the first edition was the Columbo tactic,
Right.
and to me that's like the meat of tactics. I took that away as this is what I got to get better at. Even as
Yeah.
an apologist, we tend to want to answer objections so fast instead of really allowing the person to clarify their position. So I'll let you kind of expound on the Columbo tactic, but
Sure.
it's so useful to ask the right questions. What do you mean by X? What do you mean by this assertion that you made? And allow the
Right.
person to really, really drive, because so many people have memorized these slogans and these ideas, and they throw it out there without explaining it. So the
Right.
Columbo tactic was good, and I like what you added some things on. What if someone's using the Columbo tactic
That's
against
right.
me?
Right. Right. Right.
How do I
Yeah.
respond to this? So maybe you can
That's
expound on the Columbo tactic, what that looks like, and what do you do if someone uses that against you?
sure. Yeah. That chapter is called Turnabout, defending
Mm.
against Colombo. Well, to get people up to speed, the book is in 2 parts. And the subtitle is a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions. So the first part is the game plan, and there's one tactic that I call the Columbo tactic that is the heart of the game plan. And in the rest of the book, the other tactics, like what a one friend we have in Jesus, and sticks and stones, and inside out, and suicide, and taking the roof off, and just the facts, all these others are meant to serve the larger game plan. They help you to find the mistake in people's thinking, but the core is the game plan. Okay, and now the name Lieutenant Columbo, I don't a lot of people have not heard that name before, the younger crowd, but it's amazing how many of the younger crowd have. I had someone tell me yesterday, yeah, my dad used to watch it. Yeah, 4 decades ago, a TV show that's a murder mystery, and the detective is named Columbo, and he comes in a old trench coat, it looks like he slept in it, tousled hair, stub of a cigar, scratching his head, muttering to himself, and this guy doesn't look like he can think his way out of a wet paper bag. He's stupid, but he's stupid like a fox because
Mm.
he's got a plan. And at
Yeah.
some point, he's going to pause and put his fingers to furrowed brow and say something like this: "I don't know. There's something about this thing that bothers me," and that kind of thing. And then he asks a question, and thank you. You're very intelligent. One more thing, one, and then he one more things him to death, question after question. So the idea, of course, he gets his guy, the bad guy or the bad girl, as the case may be.
Mm.
But he comes in. The key is he's coming in under the radar in a very relaxed way, just curious. Something about this thing bothers me. I'd like to know such and so. Help me out. Now, when Columbo starts, of course, he shows up at the crime scene. There's a dead body. What does he know? Nothing. He just knows there's a corpse there. So the first thing that he has to do is start gathering information to get the lay of the land. Okay.
Mm.
Now, that's the first step of the tactical game plan, gather information. Now, when I say first step, I want your viewers to understand I don't want them thinking about the end game. Do not be thinking about winning that person to Christ. Do not be thinking about getting to the gospel. You don't know how to maneuver in this conversation unless you get some intel. All right.
Mm.
That's like charging over the hill, pardon the military metaphor, guns blazing, saying, I'm going to win the war right now. And you don't know what's on the other side of the hill. You might be facing artillery that takes you out like that.
Mm.
So you want to get some intel. And pardon me for continuing to use the military metaphors because you know that my engagement style is not hostile, all right?
Mhm.
Not D-Day, but diplomacy. However, I think they're appropriate because they capture the sense of maneuvering and positioning and thoughtfulness that go into the kind of thing we're talking about here. And
Mm.
so the first step is to gather information. And we use a question to find out what the lay of the land is. And the model question is, what do you mean by that? Okay, now it's a very, very flexible question. Sometimes you're just saying, hi, who are you? I'm sitting on the airplane next to somebody. I'm just drawing them out a little bit. But I'm hope if I can get to spiritual things or something spiritual comes up or they're offering a challenge or an objection, that's when I want to ask a clarification question. I don't want to fight. I don't want to try to rebut right away. Usually, as you pointed out, this is a slogan. People say this without thinking about it. Well, Jesus never existed. Okay. Or there is no God, or the Bible's been changed, or evolution has proven that God doesn't exist, or whatever. Everything's relative.
Mm.
Well, you know what? I have some information that would be helpful with those questions, but I'm not going to just start dumping information on people
Yeah.
until I force them to be more careful about their charge or their challenge. I'm going to want more information. So if somebody says everything's relative, look, I wrote a book on relativism. Here it is, right there. I know,
Yeah.
I know what relativism is, but I don't know that they do. And so I'm going to ask them, well, what do you mean by relative? When you say everything's relative, what do you mean by that? I'm going to let them explain. And
Mm.
if they say Jesus never existed, I say, really? What do you mean by that? Do you mean there was never a person named Jesus that lived in the Middle East 2,000 years ago? Or do you
Mm.
mean that he wasn't the person in the Bible? I'm just not clear on your point. What are we doing? We're doing the thing that is kind of counterintuitive for most Christians. We're letting the skeptic talk and talk and talk.
Mm.
But I'll tell you the secret, and you probably know this just from using tactics from the original book. The more you let the other person talk, the deeper trouble they often get themselves into.
Right.
Because reciting slogans, they haven't thought about it. These things have force because of their ambiguity. And when they are forced to be more precise about their view, they end up losing their way.
Mm.
Notice that there's progress being made here because they're trying to explain something they don't understand about their own idea, even though the Christian hasn't advanced his view at all. All he's done is ask a clarification question.
Right.
And this is the power of these questions that a lot of people don't understand. The questions themselves allow you to make progress.
Yeah, and I think that's where the inside out idea comes into play too. You start finding out that people have had some bad experiences with the church, or they've got some demons in their past, and you allow them to vocalize that. Then you know what you're working with, rather than handing a track and saying come to church. You get an idea of what you're working with. By the way, we
Sure.
had Jay Wallace on, and he talked about in Forensic Faith how he felt like he was in a race with Peter Boghossian, right?
Yeah.
He felt like he was trying to reach the Christians out there who don't really have a strong foundation on what they believe. And I
That's
feel
right.
like you are in the same race with Peter Boghossian. Um, and for those listening, Peter Boghossian is an atheistic philosopher who does what he calls street epistemology. And
Right.
so he will
Right.
corner some Christians on the street, and he's got a camera, or he and his team, and they'll do exactly what you're doing with tactics, but the flip side, they'll ask Christians questions and allow them to try to clarify their view. And a lot of times they end up getting tripped up and trapped into a scenario where they don't have an answer. And
Right.
so I wonder if you could expound on that a bit, the
Sure.
similarities between you and Peter here, and
Eh,
how to respond to that as a Christian if someone's using the Columbo tactic on you, how do
Sure.
you respond?
Yeah, there are. First, let me flesh out the tactic a little bit more because we talked about the first step of the game plan. The
Mm,
second step of the game plan is to what I call reverse the burden of proof, which simply means that you're going to ask for reasons why people believe what they believe. That Boghossian does this, of course. So the first step, what do you mean by that? Is to get the information, and you keep asking that until you get the information that you need. Then the next step is to ask, how did you come to that conclusion? What are your reasons for that? And see if they have any reasons. Again, the Christian is in a very relaxed situation there. Now, there's a third use of Columbo, and the third use is to make a point. All right. So we're using questions to help a person see the view that we have, but we're using a little circuitous kind of way. And this is what Boghossian uses a lot. He's going to ask the Christians more the second kind of question and the third kind of question. He's going to ask them, why do you believe what you believe? And you know what he's waiting for. He's waiting for the Christian to say, "I believe by faith." And of course, the way he's defined faith is belief with no reasons.
mm,
Okay, well, why would you believe something you have no reasons for? Well, Bible says so. Well, but you're putting your faith in the Bible. So what are your reasons for believing in the Bible?
mm.
Well, because the Bible's the Word of God. I understand that's your belief. But what are the reasons that you have for believing that the Bible is the Word of God? Okay, so I'm just role playing Boghossian's maneuvers here. And by the way, all of those are fair questions, I think. But not all of his questions are fair. And there are going to be other questions that I've had the so-called street epistemologist types on the show. They've called me and we've been round and
Mm,
round. And sometimes they can be very clever.
yeah.
So when what we need to do is, for one, it'd be better it'd be helpful if we if we understood some of the reasons why we believe what we believe.
Yeah.
But of course, with Boghossian, the first move is he has twisted the definition of faith. Okay,
Mm,
biblical faith is not believing in spite of or against or without evidence. All right, that is what it says. At the end of the Gospel of John, John says, there's many other signs and wonders that Jesus performed. What's a signs and wonders? It's a miracle. It's an attesting miracle. Here's the
mm,
proof that I am who I claim to be. I'm going to walk on water. I'm going to feed the multitudes. I'm going to heal the sick. I'm going to raise the dead. Okay, that's evidence. And he said, why? Well, John says, why am I giving all this evidence? So that you will believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and in believing the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of God, and believing in life in his name. So John makes it really clear right there. There's lots of verses we could draw from, but there's one that our trust in Christ is based on reasons, but it's not blind faith. If we know that, then we can rebut the challenge when they suggest, well, it's blind faith. Then I'm going to ask the street epistemologist, why would you think my faith is blind?
mm,
Well, because you don't have any reasons for it. Did you ask me for any reasons for
yeah.
my view? No. Well, why don't you ask me some reasons and I'll tell you why my faith is not blind. Now, you may not be convinced by the reasons, but that's entirely different than saying I have no reasons at all.
Right.
So you notice how I just use questions there to turn the tables a little bit. Okay. Now, I've been around for a while. I kind of see these things coming, but anybody can do this with a little practice. And especially if they're asking you a bunch of questions that are leading you down the primrose path, and you think, oh, I'm going to get whacked down here. I don't know what I'm committing myself to. All I suggest is stop the process by simply saying, it seems like you're asking a series of questions to make a point. Okay, I understand that, but I'd feel more comfortable if you just made the point instead of asking me questions about it. So
Yeah.
what is the point that you're getting to? Then if they give the point, then you could respond to the point, but you're not being taken advantage of. And so that's also in the Inside Out chapter. Now, people have asked me, what if people say that to you when you're using the Columbo tactic? I say, well, I'd make my point. At
Yeah.
that point, they would have maneuvered me out of a tactical advantage, but I can still make my point.
Sure, sure. And one of the things that I loved, it's in one of the opening chapters, is the professor's ploy. I think there's a lot of college students that get in this awkward scenario where they're in a classroom and the professor comes in and says, "Hey, you're all gonna recant your belief in Jesus by the time I
Yeah,
get done teaching this class," or
yeah.
something along those lines.
You
Or
won't be a Christian when I get done with you. Yeah,
That's right. That's right. And so what happens is the professor has the microphone, and it seems noble for Christians to raise their hand and say, "Professor, I disagree, and this is why." But you scale that back a bit. I've been in those scenarios, Greg, and I've had that happen in the classroom, and I haven't, I wasn't the one to raise my hand. What I would do usually is I'd go to the professor after class and say, I
uh-huh.
want to know what you meant by that. But still, it's very awkward or almost intimidating as a college student because you're like, man, this guy is the guy grading my papers, and and he comes in and he says
Right.
this, and so,
Now,
yeah, I love the professor's ploy because I feel like there's a lot of college students in that position of they're
right.
in a classroom where the teacher is really pushing, especially in our educational institutions now, secular ideologies. God is dead, and and so without
Yeah,
God, this is what your ethics should look like. And
right.
so I wonder if you could just expound on that a bit and how a
Sure,
student should respond.
sure. The game plan had three parts, and the second part was reversing the burden of proof. In other words, when people make claims, we ask them to defend their claims before we refute their claims. Pardon me. And so the professor's ploy is in a chapter. I separated that out and made a whole chapter out of it and one other move, getting out of the hot seat. And I think the chapter is called Two Reliable Rescues. So the professor's ploy is a burden of proof switcheroo. So when a student is in a class, I agree with you. I don't think it's a good idea to go head to head with the professor because it violates a basic rule of engagement. You never make a frontal assault on a superior force in an entrenched position, right? Duh. All right. But what do? We don't have to abandon it. We could talk to them privately, fine. But if you're a student, there is nothing wrong with students asking reasonable questions. That's what students are supposed to do. So when the professor says, well, the Bible is just a bunch of fables, you could raise your hand and maybe ask the first Columbo question. How did you come? No, I'm sorry. What do you mean by that, Professor? I'm not entirely clear. Are you saying there's no historical uh, details in the Bible that are reliable? It's all a make me up, or help us understand your point, Professor. Now, by the way, is that challenging the professor? No, that's not challenging. That's just that's what students do. Okay, are
Right.
supposed to do. All right, so there's no challenge there. But now, after he explains all of this stuff, is that he gives more detail about what he means by that. Now, another question can come up. Well, Professor, how did you come to the conclusion that the Bible is just a bunch of fables? Okay, now at this point, the question is a little bit more pointed, and he may figure out that you're a Christian sandbagging there, asking questions, and he's going to maybe call you out.
Mm,
So, what he might say is something like this, and this is the professor's ploy itself. And he might say, well, oh, you must be one of those Christians who believes the Bible's the Word of God. Okay, well, I got a few extra minutes. Why don't you stand up and explain to the rest of the class why you think I'm wrong and you're right? Okay. Now, for those listening, some might be thinking, man, oh, now what? I'm stuck. But he has just cheated. The professor's cheated because he has switched the burden of proof regarding his own claim on to the Christian who hasn't made a claim.
mm,
And my advice is don't take the bait. Basically, what you can say to the professor is, well, professor, you actually don't know what I believe because I never said it.
yeah.
I'm just asking questions. Okay, that's it. And so this is a way that the key with anybody who is demanding that you disprove their view, which is the professor's ploy, is to say to that person, well, wait a minute, I'm just trying to figure out what you believe and why you believe it. In many cases, we haven't even put our view on the table.
Right.
It's your job to explain the reasons for your view. Are you saying that you don't have any reasons for your view? Notice that's a comeback, that's a question. And so we come back to the professor. Are you saying you had no reasons? Oh, I have reasons. Okay. Well, would you tell us?
Yeah.
I mean, that's not a power play.
Right.
That's not rude. That's not, I'm the student.
Right.
I'm not here to lecture the class. I'm just a student. I'm trying to learn. So what are those reasons why you say that? And there's a way of parrying the professor's ploy. When you internalize the maneuver, and I set aside an entire chapter because it's so important, along with how do you get out of the hot seat, which is another circumstance. Once you parry the maneuver, you learn how to do that. You can be totally relaxed in the circumstance, knowing you have nothing to defend because you haven't put your own view on the line in that circumstance. And all of the responsibility is on either the professor or whoever is making the point. It's a great maneuver.
Yes, I love that because I felt like it takes the pressure off college students that they want, and what you're doing is you are making sure you're kind of holding his feet to the fire in the sense that, like you said,
Right.
he's the professor, you're the student. So I'm just here to learn, and if
Yeah.
you're going to make these claims, I just want to know more about that. And
Sure,
I
sure.
like what you say in the book, you don't even know if I may be an atheist. You don't know that I'm a Christian. I haven't said that yet. I haven't made that
Yeah.
claim, but I
Sure,
want to know what you're trying to get at
sure.
with your assertion here.
Right.
Um,
So, important part to this, though, is the Christian in that situation cannot make statements.
mm,
If the Christian makes statements, he's in play making his own claims, and now he bears a burden of proof. The Christian has got to ask appropriate questions. That's where the safety is. Once we start making statements, it's a whole different ballgame.
that's huge because as like I said, as a person who studies apology and wants to find reasons for my faith, I reading through Tactics again was just as convicting as reading through it the first time because I'm going, man, I need to be asking more questions. Why am I jumping so fast to throw out these, responses? Because all I'm doing is I'm bearing the weight, I'm bearing the burden of proof,
Yeah.
and I'm the only one on the defense, and the other person's always on the offense. And so it's just so huge because whether you're a seasoned apologist or whether this is all new to you, this process is so important and it's
Sure.
so effective.
Well, there's a place for making our point, but that's the
Mm,
third use of Columbo. But we're going to use questions to do that. So we are
right.
not going to abandon the question asking motif, even when, in a certain sense, we're going on the offensive with our views. So I'll just give you a very quick example of this, because you can actually enlist your opponent, the skeptic, um, in the process.
Mm,
That is, you're going to ask them questions to give you information that are going to be part of your argument. So, so for example, somebody asked me to give a good reason. It was a Q&A. Can you give me a good reason to believe in God? I said, yeah. Let me ask you a few questions. Do you believe? I know these are very basic questions. Do you believe that things exist? It's just very general. Yeah, of course, things exist. I had a student at University of Toronto said, "Yeah, this microphone exists." Okay, I can work with that. I said, "The things that exist, have they always existed? Is the material of the universe eternal?" Well, nobody believes that anymore because they believe in Big Bang cosmology. Okay, so no, no. Oh, so yeah, in other words, notice I'm role playing here. In other words, skeptic, uh, everything came into existence at a point, right? Yeah, that's when time
mm.
began and everything began. Big Bang. Okay, great. Okay, last question I want to ask you. Help me out here. What caused the Big Bang? What caused everything to come into existence? Now, you know this is the cosmological argument for the existence of God. But
Mm,
notice I'm not just voicing the argument, I'm stepping up to it with questions. And the final question The final step is a question to the person. Then I tell them, by the way, I'll make it easy for you. You have only two choices. Either something caused it or nothing caused it. So what do you think? Okay, now it's their turn. What, well, look at, it's going to be hard for them to say something caused it because they don't want to say something because that something is outside of nature and it would have to be pretty powerful, pretty smart, personal for a number of reasons, and it's starting to sound like God, and they don't want to go there. Okay, well, what's their only other alternative? It's either something or no thing. That's it. All right. But if they say no thing, well, that's worse than magic.
Mm.
Because in magic, you've got a magician pulls a rabbit out of a hat. But in this case, you have no magician and you have no hat.
Right.
You just got the rabbit, the universe coming. So my point to him at that point, and for the audience that was listening, is even if you think it possible, which I don't think, but even if you think it possible that something could come from nothing, it could pop into existence without a cause, which is contrary to all of our experience of reality. It's not the odds-on favorite.
Mm.
And if it's not the odds-on favorite, then the odds-on favorite is that something caused the universe, which means it's reasonable to believe in God and unreasonable not to. Now, notice that was just a Kalam cosmological argument. In other words, a Big Bang needs a Big Banger. That's the way I put it, my
Yeah.
summary. And but it was all delivered with questions, which questions in some cases had him put pieces on the table that I could then use to spring my final question to make the conclusion seem, if not inevitable, certainly the most reasonable option. That's the
Yeah.
power of the tactical game plan.
Yeah, that's it. And that's wonderful. So I want to play devil's advocate, Greg, for a minute, and let you just kind of, because people who are listening, they hear these slogans all the time. So I'll throw a few of them at you, and just how would you respond to these claims?
So
So
I'll interact with you then on this. You're the bad guy.
yes, yeah, I'm the bad guy, right? So you were talking about, God, something came, or it's crazy to say that something came from nothing. So we believe logically that something came from God. And so you hear this out. Well, I usually get this response back. Well, okay, but we'll discover what that something was later on. We'll figure that out, or there's this quantum vacuum that all life came into existence from, and all those crazy things. But what I do know is that science disproves religion. It always has, and evolution has disproved all of your theories. These objections are thrown out a lot. So how would you respond to that, Greg?
Okay, so what you've done, let's say, what am I going to call you, Clark? So you're an alter ego now, Fred. No, I'll call
Okay.
you Bob because that was the
Yeah.
atheist who called me for the. So Bob, you made a whole bunch of statements right there.
Mm.
Okay, so help remind me what was the first thing that you said? I should
Well,
have written it
science.
down.
So science will figure it out
No, you
someday.
said something else. Oh, okay. So, oh yeah, science will figure it out someday. Okay, so Bob, what you're saying is you have a big hole in your knowledge. Is that right? You don't know
Right.
how the universe came into being, right? Fair
Right.
enough, right? And what you're saying is you're hoping that science is going to give you an answer in the future about something that is outside of the realm of science, the non-natural world. Is that what your hope is? Remember, because the natural world is what came into existence. Is that what your hope is?
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so how did you ever complain about Christians using the God of the gap as a
Of
fallacy?
course. Of
Okay,
course.
so explain to me how what you just described is not an example of a science of the gap.
Can't do it.
Yeah, okay, so now it's a
But
balls
they'll
in your
probably
court. So,
say, oh, so let's play a little harder. So they'll probably say, Greg, but this is in the realm of science. We just haven't discovered it yet. We're gonna find a material cause for everything coming into being.
okay, let me see if I understand you. So you said we're going to find a material cause for all the material things coming into being.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so So what you're saying is, before all material things came into being, there was some material thing that caused the other material things.
Right.
Well, then it isn't before all material things came into being, because there's a material thing before. I'm
Right.
asking you where'd that material thing come from? And that's the Big Bang answer.
Mm,
There is no material thing before the Big Bang,
mm,
not on your view. Okay,
right.
so help me understand your point, because it sounds to me you're saying like a material thing created all material things. So did that material thing create itself? And if it created itself, how could it act to create itself before it actually existed?
Right. So I think the route. I'm a terrible atheist, by the way. But
Yeah, but you see the problem there.
yes,
By the way, all I'm doing is asking for clarification. You're saying material things created some material thing
yes.
created a material thing, and also you stated earlier that science has disproved religion. So my question is precisely how
Mm,
has science disproved religion?
yeah, yeah. Well, Greg, I mean, we have so many great people: Lawrence Krauss, Sam
Right.
Harris, Christopher
Sure.
Hitchens, Richard Dawkins.
Yeah, but I'm not
Uh,
asking about the personalities. I'm asking about the arguments. Can you give me the arguments that these very bright people have given to show the claim that you made that science has disproved religion? I know that's a hard one for you, so let me ask you the question a different way. Does science deal with the material realm or the immaterial realm?
the material realm,
Right. Okay.
mm,
Is religious concerns on the material realm or immaterial realm?
the immaterial realm.
Okay, so how can science that only addresses the material realm tell you something doesn't exist in the immaterial realm?
I got to go read more Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins.
I'll tell you something, they're not going to help you.
That's right. That's right.
But-
But you can
well,
see
this is
what we're
going to be
getting
an
at here. I am a
exercise.
terrible
Yeah,
atheist, by the way. So any of my atheist friends, listeners, are probably raging. But you know, but this is a demonstration. I'm just echoing some of the slogans out there. Science has
sure.
disproved religion. And what Greg is doing, if you're listening, is he's making me explain that. I mean, people say these things and just don't explain them. And even I have read some of these atheistic works, and I come away with nothing.
Hmm.
And I really try. I don't just say that like I read these books from a Christian point of view and don't give them the time
Sure.
of day. Like I really, really try. But when I hear Lawrence Krauss trying to make a case for something from nothing, all I
Yeah,
see is the can being pushed further down the road, kicked further down the road,
that's
and
right.
now you've got to explain a quantum vacuum. So
Yes.
these questions are
His
so
nothing,
good.
his nothing is not nothing either.
It's not. That's right.
Here's the way I want to encourage your people, your viewers, to say that word. No thing.
Mm,
Is a quantum vacuum a thing? Yes.
mm.
Then it's not no thing,
That's right. That's right.
right? You're saying something from no thing, and then you say
Yeah.
the quantum vacuum. Okay,
Yeah.
that is not, oh, well, we've redefined it, nothing. I said, yes, you have.
Right.
That's the problem.
Right. And I
That's
love the
convenient.
analogy. Dr. William Lane Craig uses this. You read the Odyssey, and of course the Cyclops. They tell him his name is No One, and he says, "No one's hurting me. No one's hurting me. Come rescue me. No one's hurting me." And of course nobody comes to his rescue because,
Uh-huh.
of course I'm paraphrasing, but that proves the point that when we say words like nothing, we mean absolutely no thing.
Correct.
And obviously we have evidence, material evidence that points back to the universe from a beginning. And
Yeah.
so we have great philosophical evidence or great philosophical principles to say that you don't get things from nothing. You just don't.
Yeah.
I'm
That's
not
right.
worried about a pizza popping into my lap right now.
Yeah. It's like a
That
guy
would
who
be
said
great,
once
but
said, a person has no money in their bank account, but they keep checking the statement to see if they earned any interest.
that's right.
Not going to happen.
That's
By the
right.
way,
That's right.
say I want to go back to the way you phrased something a moment ago about defining nothing. The key with people like Krauss is they redefine nothing to be
Right.
something, and we have to hold their feet to the fire on that
Mm,
because the quantum vacuum had to come into existence too. Once you have a quantum vacuum, then maybe the physics will allow you to get other things, Okay, but that's not the issue. The
Right.
issue is, where did the quantum vacuum come from when well, I can't even say prior, because on their view, there was no time before the Big Bang. So there was no before. But the point was, everything came into existence by no thing.
Right, right.
Universal negation is the way Bill Craig puts it.
Yeah. Let me throw one more at you because I know where the conversation shifts a lot of times. So once you get someone to say, okay, well, there may be a God, I'm agnostic towards that, but you're very you would be sort of arrogant to say that Jesus is the only way, right? I mean, wouldn't that be a very narrow statement to say that Jesus is the only way to God? And there's so
Why
many
would
religions. Why is your religion the right one?
why would that be arrogant?
Well, because there's so many religions, there's so many
Right.
worldviews.
I understand that, but I'm still trying to figure out, just because there's so many options in principle, why is it arrogant for somebody to think they get the right option? You go to the doctor, right? When you go to the doctor, you're sick. Well, there's all kinds of stuff you can stick into your arm,
Hmm.
right? I had three of them yesterday, man. I'm one on one side and two on the other side. They were very specific things. They
Hmm.
were the things that cured the disease, or dealt with the issue. Right, I got a flu shot, for example. All right. Now he could have shot Novocaine in, or he could have shot sugar water. All right. Why is it arrogant to think that the flu shot clears, will cure the flu or keep me from getting the flu? Why is that arrogant? That's the key I'm getting at.
Hmm.
Because what they're saying is, now notice, this kind of charge changes the subject, because you were talking about whether or not Jesus is the only way, and now we're talking about your personality, your
Yeah.
character. You have bad character. Let me ask you a question. And this was one you could offer him.
Hmm.
Could an arrogant person be right about his view?
Hmm.
What do
Yeah.
you
Sure.
think? Of
Absolutely.
course. All right. So whether I'm arrogant or not has no bearing on whether or not Jesus
Hmm.
is the truth. Is that correct?
Right.
Then why are you calling me names instead of addressing the issue?
Right. Yeah. I see your point. So what I would do now if I'm an atheist is, and I hear the state, they move away from that. Okay, I was wrong for calling you arrogant. I shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
The Bible has been changed. I had this one thrown at me recently. The Bible's been changed so many times. So what? And of course, men wrote it down. So what would make you think that the Bible is the Word of God, and the claims made in the New Testament are trustworthy?
Okay. Notice that there were three things at least that were in your statement. And this is another thing I want your viewers to be listened to. First, you said the
Mm,
Bible's changed. And then you said men wrote it down, which is not controversial.
right.
That's my view. Okay,
Yeah.
but there's something hidden in that claim. Men wrote it and they made mistakes.
Right.
Okay. Now, and then your last one was, how do you? What was the last one that you said? I was writing here while you were talking. I don't remember
Well,
the
how do
third
you know
one.
that it's reliable if
Oh, really?
these changes
Okay.
and
All right.
imperfect men wrote it
So
down?
now, of course, the word reliable is ambiguous. Do you mean reliable that the words were copied accurately, or do you mean reliable that the things that were stated that happened actually took place? Notice that, well,
Hmm.
I need to get, there are three different things asked here, and there's ambiguities here. When
Wow.
you say the Bible's been changed, what do you mean?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you can
So
tell me.
yeah. So
Telephone game.
so
Telephone
I,
game
I
for
just
7 o'clock.
I just have of course I've heard, I've read, I've seen articles, I've seen things that say that the Bible has changed over time, and there's different translations of the Bible and different commentaries, and of course Christians disagree about what's in the Bible.
Okay, well, just to be clear now, Doug, you're talking about
Doug.
different things again. You're talking about whether the Bible's changed over time. Then
Mm,
you talk about different translations, which is a whole different thing. You could
right.
have my book is translated into Polish and Spanish, my tactics book. Okay, all
Mm,
right, but that's a translation. We're not talking about the translation. We're talking about the original. All right, and then you say that. You have commentaries. So all that is people's ideas about what it means, and then you say
mm,
people disagree. I agree with almost everything you've said. All right, but you're an atheist, right? Or
mm,
maybe you want to qualify it an agnostic. You believe in science, right?
mm-hmm.
Are there different commentaries about science?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Was the science books written by men?
Right. Yeah. Sure.
Does that mean they're unreliable?
No. Of
Are
course
there
not.
differences of opinions about science?
Yeah,
Okay, so
absolutely.
all the things that all the objections you raised apply exactly the same way to the things that you trust regarding science.
Mm.
Why do you think that those are liabilities for the Bible?
Because of the claims in the Bible are miraculous, and I don't believe in miracles. So,
Oh, okay. So, in other words, you've just decided that nothing like that could have happened. Well, that's not a problem with the text. That's an obstacle that you placed there yourself. Why did you do
mm.
that?
Well, because I've never seen a miracle. I've heard about them. I've never seen one. I just believe that science can explain things from a materialistic, perspective. We can explain
Okay.
things.
All right. Well, in order to be fair, Doug, that would mean that you would have to be familiar with all of these claims and be able
Hmm.
to say that these people are mistaken, that science can actually explain what happened. And here's the explanation. Because if you are just simply saying science can explain it and you can't show how it's explained it, or if you just simply say, I don't believe in it, how is that different from wishful thinking? Now, you talk about placing things
Hmm.
on evidence. Where's your evidence there? Oh, I have never seen it. Really? I have
Hmm.
never seen a baby born.
Yeah.
I have never seen Tucumcari, New Mexico. I have never, there's all kinds of places I've never seen and things
Right.
I've never seen,
Right.
but that doesn't mean I don't have reason to believe they're real.
Yeah.
But you won't believe. Now, tell me if I'm mistaken here, Doug. You won't believe in me they're real because you've already decided they can't happen, no matter what the evidence. Is that fair?
That's fair. Suppose you're right.
All right. So why did you do that? Why aren't you willing to follow the evidence where it leads?
I don't know. I hadn't really thought about all this.
Okay, so maybe there's more going on here, Doug, than just
Yeah.
evidence.
Yeah.
I mean, would you? I mean, this is a little personal, but I'm just going to ask it. And it's just for something for you to think about. Maybe there's some moral issue
Mm.
that might be getting in the way of you acknowledging that there's a God who has appropriate authority over
Mm.
you. Think that's
Wow.
possible?
Maybe. Now, Greg, are you saying that I'm a bad person now?
I'm asking you to assess yourself. Maybe there's a moral issue
Mm.
that's causing you to declare things don't happen or don't exist, even if you don't have good evidence for it.
Ah.
Because these things are tied together. If there is a God, oh, that changes things, doesn't it?
Yes.
Okay. Makes you feel a little uncomfortable, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it makes me feel uncomfortable. I get it.
Yeah.
Well, that was a good role play.
Yeah. And if there's atheists listening, I'm sorry, I'm a terrible atheist. I haven't practiced my atheistic lines. Um, but no, these are
Well,
real. These are real things. In fact, I was just in a bookstore, and I had a conversation like this. I was in the philosophy department. I was looking at books, and someone asked me why I was there, and it led down this rabbit hole. And they started making these claims. Well, the Bible's been changed, and and honestly, Greg, I have a little bit of I've done a little bit of research on those things, but I didn't go down and
right.
offer this research. In
Yeah.
fact, I kind of gave him the Kalam cosmological argument and started there. I just want to put a pebble in the shoe,
Sure, of
just
course.
make someone think about these things. And
This is a good
obviously,
instinct. This is a good instinct because you realize you can't answer all the questions, especially in the time allotted. And so
mm,
you make a choice to do something useful. Maybe
yeah,
you can't pull a weed, but you can water something that's already growing, or, to go back to our gardening illustration. I think what you just said is really important for your viewers to think about. You can't do it all. So you choose one thing to do. Put a stone in their shoe if you can.
absolutely. And I keep making the comment that I'm a terrible atheist, but let me also say I have met people who are terrible atheists. I'm not trying to make fun of those people. I mean, this sounds like conversations that I've really had, where it
Yeah,
really comes down to I've never heard it that way. I've never thought of it that way. And so, maybe I'm a terrible atheist, or maybe I'm a lot like some of the people you will actually have these conversations with
sure. Sure.
around the
Well, those are
table.
common
So,
objections. those are common objections. Clark, I thought you were going to say I may be a terrible atheist, but I'm also a terrible Christian too. So there you
Yeah,
go.
that's right. I'm that as well.
I'm in the
All
same
right,
boat.
man. Well, I tell you what, the book's called Tactics. We've talked it over, but you cannot get from this podcast the richness that's in the book. Please, please, please go get the book. Give Greg a 5-star review and nothing less, and go give him the
Well,
review and get the
if you
book.
think it's worth it, if you don't think it's worth it, then don't get a don't get a. But actually, if you think it's not worth it, don't give it any review at all. I'm batting 1,000 right now at 40.
There you
But
go.
yeah, it's the remember it's the 10th anniversary edition. It has that little red thing up there, and you'll find it at Amazon really easily. You go to STR, Stand to Reason, the organization I work for, str.org. So that's available there too. And actually, if you're Stand to Reason folk and you go to STR and make a $20 donation to Stand to Reason in December, that's easy to do online. We'll send you a copy of the book that I signed. So, it helps us, it helps you. So there's another way of doing it.
Wow, that's a great deal there. So yeah, please do that. Greg, it's been great having you on, man. I appreciate you coming on and dismantling Doug in this debate here, and I had a good time. This has been good. Thank you.
Well, you're so welcome, Clark. I'm glad for what you're doing with solid faith, and just keep up the good work, buddy.
Appreciate it, man.
Who'd have thought I'd be making music for God though? Who'd have thought that I'd start a show with my eyes closed? Old me was on pills, walking a tightrope, and spice smoke, and I was running from 5-0. Who'd have thought you'd be riding, bumping to my song? Who'd have thought I'd be downloaded on iPhones?